Well, we started this series beginning of June, roughly. And some of you all came in here the first time and you stuck with me through the whole thing. I appreciate that. Or if you haven't, just been with a few times here, I still appreciate that. Glad that you've been with me. So we started with a series pointing out the change that led to loss and grief in the garden when Adam and Eve sinned. It's amazing how many times I've been teaching Sunday school and the preacher's lesson coincides with what I have to say. Appreciate Ryan's lesson today. They lost a wonderful life of ease because of their sin, and this led to suffering. Now, even a change as positive as a promotion at work, we've talked about the fact that there are losses to that. For instance, a person gets a promotion at church, at work, and they have more money, and so what happens? Well, their family starts spending more money. So there are other issues that come up. Today we're going to talk about a change in trust. And we will also distinguish between that, a change, loss of trust, but also an alienation. Have you ever been trying to sleep with one eye open? Now, why would a person do that? Why would a person try to sleep with one eye open? Well, it's possible that they're in a situation where there's someone there that they don't trust. Something happened in a relationship and there's a loss of trust. So things change due to a loss of all kinds. The word loss has to do with suffering. It's a feeling that part of a person's life is missing. And of course, what we talked about change being what we've gotten used to. Well, we're not used to this. And so we've lost some things. Well, today we're talking about loss of trust. The person changes and adjusts to the missing ingredient, or he gets stuck and he can't move on. This may be the most important element in a relationship, trust. We are both trusted and we trust other people. I trust my wife, she trusts me. I trust a contractor that I get to do a job. The contractor trusts me. A parent trusts their child, the child trusts the parent. So it's reciprocal, you might say. But a trust is the foundation of all our interactions with people. What happens when trust is no longer part of a relationship between people or institutions? Now, today we're going to deal mostly with people-to-people relationships. First, there are two definitions. Stephen Covey says trust is the glue of life. It's the most essential ingredient in effective communication. It's a foundational principle that holds relationships together. These two facets of trust, trust itself is a firm belief or confidence in the honesty, integrity, reliability, and justice, etc., of another person or thing. And if we talk about alienation, a person is alienated when there's no longer a friendship relationship. There's estrangement, as in his behavior alienated his friends. And if we were to put this on a scale of 1 to 10, we realize that sometimes there's a partial trust. It's not complete trust, but it's a partial trust. And so we might say, for instance, my trust in this person is an 8. Now, with alienation, there may be complete absence of trust. For the purpose of alienation, today's discussion, alienation will be used if a person has no trust in an individual at all. And there can be extreme grief in these situations where trust changes. Now, how is trust built in a relationship, and why does trust exist in a relationship? Since my study of the human mind and psychology, you might say, and development is limited, I won't go into the nuts and bolts of this. But I do know that the first relationship that we have goes a long way in developing trust, not only in that person, that mother, that father, but also in the other relationships that we have with other people. But trust develops when a mother urges the child to jump off the side of a pool. And she says, "I won't let you go underwater." And so the child jumps, mother catches the child, and trust is developed there. What does the child lose? What kind of grief does a child have if the mother says jump, but her purpose is to teach the child to swim by allowing the child to go underwater? Did that ever happen to you? Maybe she tricks the child in order to teach him to swim. She doesn't catch him, and so the child goes underwater. Now, I think there's probably a lot of ways of explaining what happens, but I would think that the trust would suffer a little bit there. And the mother and the child might have a joke about it later on, but I don't know. But how long would it take to process such a loss if a child experiences that? Trust is built when someone is vulnerable and not taken advantage of. Someone is vulnerable. Now, sometimes in relationships, both persons are vulnerable. And so trust can be lost in that relationship, even though both are fairly strong people. But I think it's interesting that if you do have a vulnerable person and you don't take advantage of their vulnerability, their weakness, then great trust is built in that relationship. All of these qualities of a relationship depend on trust. When the level of a person's trust changes, many things are lost. Sincerity, this free from pretense, not acting, not playing a part. Consistency, that is conformity, doing the same thing each time. Competence, the ability to do something successfully or efficiently. That means capable. Reliability, the quality of being trustworthy or performing consistently well. On time, at the right place. You may have worked with people, you couldn't trust them. They weren't reliable. Commitment, dedicated to a cause or an activity. That is knowing the mission. What's our purpose? What's the goal? And valuing that. You know this person values what this group is doing, whether it be the AR or whatever group they're participating in. They know the purpose of this and they value it. They have commitment and integrity. Now that's being honest and having strong moral principles to the extent that you act with honesty and morality regardless of where you are, even if you're by yourself. That's integrity. Now, one or all of these are lost when a person loses trust. This is true in the trustor or the trustee. At the beginning of his public life, David had few people he could really trust. His own family seemed to discount his worth. When David questioned the way the army was handling Goliath, his oldest brother was dismissive of him. The passage says, "Now Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, 'Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption, the evil of your heart, for you've come down to see the battle.' And David said, 'What have I done now? Was it not but a word?'" So something happened in their relationship that kind of destroyed Eliab's trust of David, but it could be that just the situation where David was more vulnerable and Eliab was just being a bully. I don't know. Saul could not be trusted. David was traveling in the countryside and people were snitching on him, betraying him. Michal, his wife, a daughter of Saul, was trustworthy at one time, but she turned against him. He could rely on a small group of men. Jonathan would have given his life for David. The sons of Zeruiah, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel were stalwarts. They were with him from the beginning of his troubles. They would give their own lives to protect David, but they also had to be monitored. This is an example here. It was Abishai who went into Saul's camp with David on a mission to prove God's will. Saul was sleeping there, and David and Abishai were standing over the sleeping Saul, and Abishai wanted to kill him. But David's heart told him that this would be regrettable. Then Abishai said to David, "God's given your enemy into your hand this day. Now please let me pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear, and I'll not strike him twice." But David said to Abishai, "Do not destroy him, for who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" This is one aspect of trust that we may have all experienced. Riding with a friend in a car, and this friend speeds. Do you have complete trust in his driving? Well, I've experienced that. You're kind of grabbing something, to hold on to. But in order to maintain the relationship, we tolerate flaws. There's a level of distrust there. But sometimes this friendship turns into a burden. And we have to count the cost of maintaining it when there's a diminishment of trust. After David became king of Judah while he was reigning in Hebron, he was trying to save a friendship with the house of Saul, meeting with Abner, Saul's commander, trying to keep a relationship with the house of Saul. Joab killed Abner in order to avenge the killing of his brother Asahel in battle. Joab, having a rash and impetuous nature, was a friend who had to be monitored in order to maintain the relationship. When Joab came out from David's presence, he sent messengers after Abner. They brought him back to the cistern of Sirah, but David did not know about it. And when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside in the midst of the gate to speak with him privately, and there he struck him in the stomach so that he died for the blood of Asahel, his brother. Had Abner lived, it would have been an asset to David. David had a plan here. Joab was not reliable. David could not rely on him. There was a loss of trust there. We don't have any recollection in the scriptures of this relationship changing. From the time that David and Joab began that this happened, the relationship suffered because of lack of trust. If you think of those you count as friends, how many of them could be trusted without any reservation? You trust completely. Do you trust your mate completely? I'll let you go there. I won't go there. But what about your mate? I mean, are there things that your mate does and you would say, well, I need to kind of squash that somehow? You know, and that's what we learn to do. Even a spouse probably has some quirk or personality that we just tolerate. We monitor that sometimes. Maybe you have an agreement with your spouse. You monitor this character flaw, I monitor that character flaw. It was Ronald Reagan who famously said, trust but verify. And, you know, we realize what that means is that trust is good, that we should trust people. But we need to do a background check sometimes. And we need to monitor the relationship. Now, does this mean a loss of trust? This event caused a change in the relationship of David and his commander Joab. We might frame this as a friendship with limited trust. So think of people you trust within limits. Maybe a friend is not good at managing money. Would you go into business with this friend? Well, you might. But you certainly monitor that and make sure that you kept up with what was going on. Would you invest in a vacation rental with any of your friends? Maybe there might be a few of them that you wouldn't do that with. And you carefully let them know that no, this is not going to happen. But David maintained his working relationship with Joab, but he's always aware of his commander's violent tendencies. So David reigned over all Israel. David ministered justice, equity to all his people. Joab, son of Zeruiah, was over the army. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was the recorder. They worked together because it was good for the kingdom. But Joab was not reliable. There was a loss of trust among three of the children of David. This chart shows that Absalom and Tamar were children of David by Maacah, and the daughter of she was the daughter of a king, and Amnon's mother was Ahinoam. And as far as we know, Amnon was the firstborn. You realize that parents have favorite children. You realize how complicated David's life was when he had so many wives. I think he had 6. And we realize the wisdom of God in having one man, one woman life. Well, David didn't have that. Sometimes he would marry a woman in order to cement a relationship with another country. But there was a great loss of trust among these 3 children. Amnon proclaimed his love for his half-sister Tamar, but after violating her, his love turned to hatred. His behavior destroyed the trust in the family. He was the one who would have succeeded the king. He would have been king after his father David. But Tamar's brother, Absalom, wanted to avenge this outrage. After 2 years with Absalom, this festering in his mind, he arranged to have a sheep shearing, and he invited all the king's sons. In this gathering, Absalom took the chance to kill his half-brother Amnon and take a vengeance for what Amnon had done to Tamar. So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each mounted his mule and fled while they were on the way. News came to David, Absalom has struck down all the king's sons, and not one of them is left. He had his servants kill Amnon, but seeing the attack, the other sons of David ran for their lives. And people heard the report that Absalom had killed all of David's sons. What agony David was experiencing because of this. Kind of reminds me of what happened to Job. But since David didn't trust Absalom. He believed the outrageous news. Well, Jonadab, a nephew of David, corrected the news, saying that Absalom had only killed the guilty one, Amnon. But this hardly relieved David, since Amnon was his oldest child, maybe his favorite. David knew about this assault of Tamar, but he didn't do anything. He did nothing about it. When King David heard all these things, he was very angry, the Bible says. Now, the Vulgate and the Septuagint add, but he would not grieve the soul of Amnon, his son, for he loved him because he was his firstborn. So David lost the trust of Absalom. This led to Absalom's rebellion, and eventually he attempted to overthrow the kingdom. But from this, Absalom was estranged from the family. He was alienated. David could not trust him, and so there was alienation. Now, we might point out the extent of the harmful effects of false reports. This has come in our day to be known as fake news. Our media sources, Facebook, Instagram, along with major news outlets, have been part of the problem of false news reports. Someone started the report that all of King David's sons were killed, and this false report brought real suffering. See, I believe David was vulnerable. I believe he's vulnerable because he had a heart. And those of us who have a heart will be vulnerable and will suffer loss. But I don't think we should give up on our hearts. So David was like a child in that he believed many things. In our day, the headline would be, "Royal Heirs Wiped Out." Throughout history, there have been incidents that were reported inaccurately. One example, in 2014, you might remember this. There was a report of an Ebola outbreak. There was a political satire site that started this report, and this is going on, and sometimes you'll read these reports or see something on the television, and they make it look like this is true, but they just mean it to be satire, just a joke. So this internet site, known for political satire, reported an outbreak of Ebola in Texas. Texas town quarantined after family of 5 test positive for the Ebola virus. This fake report looked like a real one, and it had no disclaimer stating it was satire. It was shared 330,000 times on Facebook. In other words, did all those people, hundreds of thousands, believe that this was true? Well, they spread it out as if it was. Actually, there were 3 imported cases. That is, people who were coming to the United States had Ebola. They were treated. There was only 1 death in the United States, but this was a crisis in Africa. They reported 30,000 cases and 11,000 deaths. There was one young lady who was a member of Doctors Without Borders. She was a nurse. She returned from Africa after working in Sierra Leone, and she was quarantined for 80 hours by the New Jersey Health Department and the governor of New Jersey. Now, other governors picked up on this and issued statements based on the false report. After testing negative for the disease, she was sent home. But the mania that followed her caused her to lose her apartment. She suffered threats of violence, and her fiancé lost his scholarship at school. And so sometimes we lack trust in the very institutions that we should be able to trust. The media, government, the church. We need to be able to trust these things. There was a time in our history when the news media just reported news. Of course, there may have been mistakes, intentional or otherwise, but there was not an attempt to entertain our notions of what the truth should be. And so I believe one of the things that has suffered the most in what was talked about before the communion today, one of the things that suffered most is truth. Is it possible for an entire nation to suffer because of change due to the loss of trust? Again, we need to rely on media, government, church, businesses. David's son Absalom had an ego as big as the giant his father killed. Instead of loving and appreciating David, Absalom disrespected his father. We've already pointed out one reason for this might be true. Probably because he didn't trust David anymore. David didn't do anything to rein in or to punish Amnon. He must have had a soft spot in his heart for his son. But Joab enters the story inside of Absalom. He goes to a wise woman of Tekoa, and he says to her, I want you to go tell David a story. Tell him that you had two boys. One of the boys killed the other. Then the community wanted to kill the only son. So the woman went to David, told this story, and it had the same kind of effect that the prophet Nathan had when he told David the story about the one ewe lamb. Again, David's heart was so soft and he was so vulnerable because of that he believed her. This caused him to bring Absalom back, but he put him at a distance from him. I'm going to try to move through some of this material because I'm running out of time. So Joab interceded on the part of Absalom, and David agreed to bring Absalom back, but he said, keep him away from me. Let him dwell apart in his own house. He's not to come into my presence. Now, how important is communication when there are issues of trust? Here you have a situation where what should have happened is they should have made up. They should have talked to each other. There should have been repentance, but that didn't happen. This arrangement made matters worse, since the real issue had not been addressed. The situation was without a resolution since King David and his son were no longer talking. Absalom at last led a full-scale rebellion. Absalom was killed by the one that had been his champion, Joab. Joab realized that Absalom was bad for the kingdom, and Joab was a nationalist. He was many things that were lacking in Joab, but he was a lover of the kingdom. So it's important that in the midst of loss, that we not clam up, that we not let resentment cause us to not talk to the person that we need to. Often a loss can be traced back to an if statement. If David had not committed adultery with Bathsheba, if he had spent more time with his children, if he'd talked to them more, if he had done something to discipline Amnon instead of turning away, if he had not played favorites. Rebekah and Isaac, another example of a family where there was a loss of trust and alienation. But we have a happy ending many years later. So if Rebekah had not chosen Jacob over Esau, and if she had been honest and fair, the family would not have fractured. She chose Jacob as her favorite son. Isaac's favorite was Esau. This kind of relationship is a breeding ground for lies, distrust, and a parent willing to alienate one of the children. Rebekah thought had to do something so that her favorite would receive the inheritance, although God had told her that the elder will serve the younger. I'm not sure if she understood that. So she devised a scheme that would deny Esau of his rightful birthright, or the blessing. So Jacob went into his father, and it's plain if you read this, and I won't read the whole thing as I'm running out of time here. It's plain that Isaac did not trust this situation. Jacob goes in, he has hair on his arms, he has the smell, he has the food that Isaac loves. He's pretending to be Esau. Isaac says, "How is it that you found it so quickly, my son?" And then Jacob has a retort, and Isaac says, "Please come near that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not." And so Jacob comes near, and Isaac says the voice of Jacob is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. Did he know? Did he know that this was Jacob pretending to be Esau? I don't know. But there wasn't a lot of trust there. So Rebekah tells Jacob, Esau's going to kill you. So Jacob runs away. He goes to Paddan Aram, and this is where he found his wife. And you see, we see in God in all of this, in all of the suffering, in all of the distrust, in all of the change, in all the loss, God is in here. And that's why in our lives, when we go through things like this, we need to remember as Christians that God is in this. He will accomplish His will. Sometimes the real issues are not addressed. And so there's an event in the lives of two or more people that leads to a loss of trust, leads to alienation, disenfranchisement, possibly tragic circumstances. A lifetime of loss can be very hard to sort out. Each of us would do well to take stock of the times we experienced the loss of trust in order to begin to unravel this. And so we've talked about when a marriage splits, when there's a divorce. And we didn't mention this, but occasionally there is a deliberate effort on the part of one of the parents to poison the mind of the children. And so this goes back to 1980, studying this, child psychologist, and one parent tries to turn the child against the other. A Christian parent would find it hard to deal with this because you can't give back in kind. The mother hears the father poisoning the children. The father hears the mother poisoning the children. Well, the Christian is not going to do that back to the other. So, this situation, if a person, if this happens to them as a child, what does this do to them as an adult? Can they trust their mate? And so we see almost like a disease passing from one generation to another because of distrust. This was a blessing that Isaac gave to Jacob. May God give you the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you, nations bow down to you. Be Lord of your brothers, may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. And so Jacob was in the line of blessing all nations of the earth. And what a powerful way to illustrate the infinite knowledge and the power of God. God is not limited by time. He has a plan. The plan will happen. Paul writes, "For this is what the promise said. About this time next year I'll return. Sarah shall have a son." And not only so, but also when Rebekah had conceived children by one man, our forefather Isaac, though they were not yet born, had done nothing, either good or bad, in order that God's purpose of election might continue, not because of works, because of him who calls, she was told, the older will serve the younger. As it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. What shall we say then? Is there injustice on God's part? By no means. God knows what's going to happen. He has blessings for us beyond anything that we could ever dream or hope for. So in summary, trust gives us many comforts and assurances. If we trust the person that's sleeping, when we're sleeping in their house, we can go to sleep. We don't have to keep one eye open. If we trust the person we're riding with in the car, we don't have to grab something and hold on. Loss of trust brings anxiety, confusion, and a loss of self-worth. Confusion because, did I do something to deserve this treatment? When trust is completely lost, there's alienation and disenfranchisement. And I would venture to say that in each of our lives, there's someone in our lives that we've given up on because we've lost trust in them. Maybe it would drugs or drink or over and over again promising to do this or that, but we've lost trust in them. There's alienation. Again, I'm not qualified to prescribe a plan to deal with things like this, but I have learned from others that analyzing the situation, in other words, why did this happen? Is this my fault or is it their fault? And number two, talking about it. These things will help. But ignoring the situation and staying quiet will not help. We have 3 more weeks in this study. And I want to suggest 3 qualities of a Christian life that change when a loss occurs. Next week, we'll talk about joy. And I hope you can be with us. Thank you for listening.